Preparing to live stream the meeting. We are live on Willem's YouTube channel, Ice Cream for Everyone.
James and Willem's Creative Sessions.
James and Willem's Creative Sessions on a Sunday morning, here again, after a slight gap.
Yeah.
Because you went skiing.
That's right. And that's why I'm wearing my mountain lumberjack plaid, because I've been told that it's acceptable to wear it. Well, technically, if it's in the winter, and it's more acceptable, I think, in the States or in North America generally than it is in France. Sorry, I have a quirky voice. Yeah, because I just got back from the mountains, and I was skiing for a week with my brother and my nieces. It was awesome. In Vars, la Forêt Blanche. So it's that place.
Wow.
Which on the postcards has a lot more snow than it does right now.
I am jealous, although navigating around the mountains I find really hard because I've got so used to being on a ski trip where you ski in a group.
Yeah.
And you just I have no awareness of how to navigate my way around a mountain at all. I just follow whoever's in front.
I have limited, because I skied a lot on my own.
Mm-hmm.
So I have limited experience, and I've been to a lot of different resorts. But I can't say I can navigate my way around a mountain. That would be way too arrogant for me. I would need to know the mountains a lot more. I can navigate my way around a trail map of a resort.
I can barely do that.
I can do a little bit more than that if I'm in a group, or if I'm seeing other people, to go between trails a little bit, or in certain resorts in the US that barely have any trails, so it's just open. But it also depends on the conditions. I mean, I was in the Southern Alps, and it's been dry everywhere, but particularly the Southern Alps have been the driest they've been in 30 years. So there's really not a lot of snow. It hadn't snowed at all. They didn't see a single cloud. It was bright sunshine from the 15th or 20th of December to the 14th of February.
Strange things are afoot.
Yes. And the 14th of February, it snowed just, not even an inch, less than an inch, half an inch, a couple of centimeters max, but with a lot of heavy winds. And so nothing was just setting. When we were there, it snowed the same way last Monday, which was honestly really nice to get a tiny dusting of fresh snow. But also a lot of the lifts were closed because of the heavy winds. So it was just only the best oriented slopes that got a little bit more snow. So the northern facing slopes, basically. And then there's a whole pan of the mountains that were just completely closed. And
because there is a whole subculture with skiing, like any subculture, the whole culture of skiing, actually.
Oh yeah, there's a huge culture.
It's a whole.
We were talking about that with my brother. It's completely strange.
Yeah.
But it's a strange activity, and human beings get up to strange activities, and we're just with an enormous amount of a high and long learning curve.
Oh yeah.
Obviously, it goes without saying that it's just all right, we're going to teach you this thing, which is technically, I guess, for fun. It really takes a lot of time to learn, and it's very dangerous.
Yeah.
And also, of course, there's generally a higher, if not a much higher, socioeconomic status that can get to go skiing at all, because it's expensive.
That's true. That is true. I noticed that when I went with my school. So
suffice to say, the mountains generally tend to be very white. It's not just the snow.
I do have a T-shirt, actually, which I bought and wore on the ski trip, and I wear occasionally, which has a family on a ski lift. And it says, "Let's do the whitest thing imaginable."
Yes. Yeah. My ski instructor in my last ski trip was black, which is very surprising. I'm sorry. It's really, really, I hope it's not too offensive to say that. It might be to some. It just, he did happen to be born in the mountains and was on skis at 3, or close to the mountains. And And that's the other thing. I did catch some of the Olympic Games. I don't know if you watched any of it. It was awesome. It was weird. It was very strange Olympic Games, but I've always enjoyed the Winter Games much more than the Summer Games. I find it way cooler and much more interesting.
Really? I've never
Oh yeah,
watched. I've hardly watched the Winter Games.
I know less
at all.
people watch it, but I've always found it. I mean, just the freestyle skiing, the snowboarding, the border cross, the ice skating, all of it, I find really fascinating. Even curling, I started getting into a little bit. I didn't really watch much of it because of but the I need to understand it a little bit more. The people are so into it. Of course, it's the Olympic Games, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know what these people are doing. They're all yelling at each other on the curling field to be like, brush, no, stop. Well, with the brushing in front of it.
That's all I know. It's
weight.
about hitting a target or something. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a little bit like petanque.
You need like a massive control on skates as well, don't you?
Yeah,
skating.
Well, actually, it's yes, but you're on shoes.
Oh,
they're wearing shoes. One of them slides and one of them doesn't. So it allows them to slide a little bit on the ice. But my brother told me that somebody got hurt and like literally, like a career-ending fall. They really, really badly hurt themselves. I can't remember how or what exactly while curling, which I was like, oh, I thought they were only still. But no, they go really fast when they need to get to a certain point and try to brush the ice. And it seems to require a lot of strength and control, clearly.
Control and skill. All of this is to say,
anyway, so I went on a tangent immediately.
That's okay, but you all of which is to say you have finished your short story, right?
No, I promised I would finish my short story, and I have not finished my first short story at all.
But
I wrote on the train over there.
Halfway?
I don't know if I'm halfway. Maybe
you can't tell with fiction, can you?
No, I guess yes. I have more or less the plot in mind, but I have to write it out. So I think I can send it to you as is. It's like in the middle, let's say vaguely in the middle.
See, there's two ways of thinking about this. If you send it to me and I read it,
it will only be a first draft, even if it's all the way to the end.
But if you send it to me and I read it and I like it, which I probably will, that might encourage you to write more.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking. Or what's the other one?
The other one is I don't want to read an incomplete thing. I want to read the full thing, which might encourage you to finish it. I don't know which one will encourage you more.
Well, the first one.
Send it to me then.
But that depends on you because you just got frustrated. But yeah, I think the frustration of you, if you want to read the end, will motivate me to finish a lot more. But there's also you're in a world of its own when you go skiing. It's difficult not to do anything else. Including the fact that I was with my nieces, although the brand new experience for me was to look after people. I was the strongest skier. I'm not usually the strongest skier so far, like as I've skied.
Oh, wow.
So I think I was practicing new skills, such as there's a bunch of slopes I would have liked to do. I would have liked to go a lot faster, but it was different. I was, looking after children. So I went back to doing not basic, but just practicing and going slowly. My brother was going slowly. He had a bad fall, not horrible fall, but bad enough that it hurt him and that it really shook his confidence as well. And he was taking it very easy, which he should be doing. But anyway, we don't have the same level. I
got used to that world as I got better. I did 5 ski trips. And by the time I was on my 5th trip or even 4th trip, I was looking after weaker skiers, which was weird for me.
Yeah. So I have sympathy now. I need to talk to a common friend of ours about the trip where we went together and I couldn't ski and he was a good snowboarder.
Yeah, but our common friend is good at anything physical, which is irritating.
No, that's not my point. My point was he had to wait on me.
Oh, okay.
And now I'm like, oh, I get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was waiting a little bit, but also just learning stuff like looking behind me, which I did fall a couple of times because of that. Because you're going fast enough. Although, of course, I slowed down to look behind me, but you ski where you look. So taking a quick glance behind you is not particularly natural when you're skiing at all. You're just kind of trying to pay attention to where you're going in the first place.
Yeah.
So, and just paying attention to and organizing, okay, well, my brother would go, so we would usually sandwich the nieces. So either I would close or he would go, or I would go first. But we changed as the week progressed. They gained more confidence as well,
Of course.
which was great. But also just reorganizing exactly how we're. If you ski in front, you're down slope. So one time I went faster just because I got more serious because one of my nieces fell and hurt herself. Not badly, just she didn't hurt herself. She just fell and hurt.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like a bit of
because
like
skiing and falling is a natural part of skiing. You have to learn to fall.
Yeah, that's what the crazy activity is.
Yeah,
I was on a lift queue at one point, and there was a kid taking care of his little sister who was really tiny. They were going on the lift together, the small lift at the end of the day, and because basically this could be summed up as like we're going up and then we come down. That's the basic summary of skiing as an activity, and you do that for fun. But it takes a long time to learn to do properly. And then the more you learn, the more you're going to be probably wanting to go do more dangerous things.
Yes, it's true.
Like depending who you are and etc. But it was great. It was a lot of fun, and I'm also counting on this, as most, I think, parents and family of kids skiing is counting on the fact that they become good enough to then we can all ski together and go on bigger ski trips. Well, bigger, I mean further possibly. Like one day I'd love to go ski in Japan. It has mystique of like fantastic powder snow and a lot of it.
Didn't know that. It makes sense. Loads of mountains.
Yeah. It was fun. And the thing I was going to say was, it's really easy to underestimate. I mean, the week of skiing is just like you do only that. Particularly, well, I like to ski. Some people just go for a couple of hours on the slopes, but I'm like, the ski lift pass costs a fortune.
Yeah.
I want to go ski. I'm out for the day.
Yeah.
So you come out for the day. So that eats up a lot of time, and then you're tired when you come back.
So tiring. Yeah.
Super tired. So you don't really, I mean, and in this case, in a small apartment with my nieces, so there's chores, cooking, cleaning. It's not heavy, but it just goes super fast. And one activity, like either watch a movie or play a board game or something with them, which is cool. That's what you want to do on holidays. But I would have to really cut the action seriously to go back to do any of my other regular things, which I didn't do at all last week. So I didn't write, I didn't meditate, I didn't journal. I was like, just, you know what? We're just on holidays.
You're on holiday.
I'm spending time with them. It's fine.
Yeah.
No, sometimes I do, or I might have an intention to, or in this case, my intention was to finish the short story before going, which I didn't do.
So you wrote on the way there, right?
Yeah, and on the way back yesterday, I was beat. I just watched a movie. I thought of it, and then I was like, I'll just read a little bit because I didn't read it all. I'm reading. I tell you, I think I can't remember if I told you. I'm reading American classic literature.
Yeah, you did. I knew that. Yeah, Faulkner.
I progressed a little bit. I'm not getting into it.
The thing, I just want to go back to what you said about writing.
Sure,
like you watched it. You were tired. You watched the movie and you read. Yeah. Writing takes energy.
Yeah, no, it does.
Some people think it's easy to write. So I think I said I would write the last post of my cancer journey thing. Turns out it wasn't the last post. It's the second or third last post, but I wrote something, and I put it on my blog. And the part of what I'm going back to, what makes writing tiring or easily avoidable, is especially when I'm writing about myself, it's emotional. It was writing that post was like reliving the whole thing again, on a different level. Although it was a bit like letting it go too, and then
that's the advantage of journaling and or writing things like
exactly and that's why both of us talk a lot about power of journaling. And it also allowed me to realize different things. Like I think something I realized was, one thing I thought about again as I wrote is how amazing the NHS is. The other thing I realized is waiting is not only boring, just waiting around is tiring. Just sitting around waiting is, oh my God.
It is.
Like, ugh. And then there was something else I realized, which I can't remember. Oh yeah, I think as time has gone on, I didn't lose my sense of humor. I don't know how, looking back, thinking about it, my sense of humor was completely intact the entire thing.
Great.
And I think it came across in the post because,
So you published it. I need to check it out.
Yeah, it's on my blog.
I'll check it out.
If you look at jamesdesouza.com, and it says there's a series of links. There's one link about my journey with testicular cancer, and I've had good feedback on those posts and people saying they're actually quite funny, and I enjoyed writing them. But I only did it yesterday, right? It wasn't.
You changed your homepage, didn't you?
My jamesdesouza.com.
Yeah, a little bit.
A little bit. Margin, not much.
That's just a list of links. Through like what are your main important links at the top?
It's there, right?
Is that a WordPress thing?
It's Well, what happened was in WordPress, I wanted like a link tree, but I wanted my own custom domain, jamesdesouza.com. And Linktree, just you can't do that unless you pay and all that kind of rubbish. Then I built one in WordPress. Then WordPress has a free template that's a Linktree now, so I just use that.
Oh yeah, and you're still using your blogspot thing, which is funny.
Yeah,
I realized my blogspot is still online, but I stopped using it a while back. I really, really, really need to change my website. It's clunky, it's heavy, it doesn't work, it's not easy to navigate.
But that's why I used jamesdesouza.com as a central point, and then just. But the blogspot, I don't know. I've had it since I don't know how long. The other thing I said I would do is type up some of my short ideas from 642 things to write about.
Yeah.
Journal, which I didn't do.
Okay.
And I thought I'll get up early and do it so I can look good in front of Willem and be amazing, and then I didn't.
You look good anyway, anytime.
Well, I do look good because a haircut and a beard.
I need a haircut. I needed a haircut before going on holidays, and I didn't do that. I also need a massage. I don't need it. I want it. Although
that's like skiing. Skiing is like.
I'm sure my legs are all knotted now. And I had ridiculous amounts of food because, of course, both my brothers are chefs. My brother has a wine bar and restaurant, and so he came with his little van, and full of like really amazing. And he took really good bottles of wine, and good beers, and really good cheese and food to make over there at home at the apartment we rented. And then we rented an apartment from a friend and previous landlord in London who has a family apartment in that resort, and it's like directly on the ski slopes. Like it's 10 meters away from one of the lifts, which is just right in front of there. It's also funny because it was on the ground floor, and it turns out, so you have a little access path that's skied and more icy and skied, but you just can go straight to the lake. And it just happens to be one place where there's a tiny bit of slope where all the families with the little ones, like the tiny kids, met for sledding at the end of the day. And we had this big bay window, and it was just like we were watching reality TV, and we were like, why are these people all in front of this? And we were looking on the balconies, like none of the other apartments. It's like literally right here that all the families are meeting at the end of the day for sledding, which is both a bit weird because they're like, okay, they're looking at us, but we're looking at them. I don't know, strange.
So we should also get back to what we wanted to talk about today.
Yes, plot. So should we look at the definition? Where do we start?
I think start with the definition.
I have a few different ideas to talk about here.
Yeah, I was thinking about good plots and bad plots.
I was thinking about a lot of the experience I have from plots in role-playing games, storytelling, obviously reading books as well.
Wow.
But plot is a word that I've heard and is massively used in looking at how a good role-playing game rolls out. Tabletop role-playing game.
Yeah. So what's the definition?
All right. Which one should we use? Cambridge or Merriam-Webster?
Which is more likely to offend Americans?
It's just Cambridge is the British version and Merriam-Webster is the English version.
So
then you got dictionary.com, but let's just go for
Cambridge is better.
I'm on Cambridge. I don't know if it's better, but
that's better. Of course, it's better. It's English.
But
It's not American. They're different.
noun, the story of funny. The story of a book, film, play, etc. That's it. That's the main
it.
definition. There's more, but
Okay.
not much more, honestly.
All right.
A secret plan made by several people to do something that is wrong, harmful, or not legal, especially to do damage to a person or government. And then the small piece of land, diagram or chart.
Yep. It's also a verb as well.
Important.
To plot
Exactly. I was getting to that. To mark or draw something on a piece of paper or a map, and to make marks to show the position, movement, or development of something, usually in the forms of lines or curves between a series of points on a map or piece of paper. What's really interesting there as a verb is that there are theories of how to plot a story on a diagram. The traditional one is the 3-act narrative. You know that?
Yeah. I didn't know that.
And the 3-act narrative is you're plotting points on a diagrams of highs and lows of what's happening to your protagonist.
Is that how it starts? I didn't know that.
What?
I knew the 3-act thing, but I didn't know it was about the highs and emotional highs and lows. That's pretty much what you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
So
I talk about that with my students.
Can you explain?
Sure. I mean, let me go through it.
Because
I'm not an expert in the 3-act narrative, but although I mean I'm not bad with it either.
Because there's a 3-act narrative, and then I remember seeing a book. All right, there's only ever 7 stories.
Yes, that's another way of looking at it. So, which I'm with one tabletop role-playing game author I interviewed, and we talk a lot about. That's on my pod. It's like literally the first episode of my podcast. It's old now, 7 years old, but it is a great. I mean, it's pretty evergreen. It's a good conversation, and we talk about storytelling and plots and writing a lot with what's his name, John Wick. Because of course we joke about the movie. It was just a year after the movie came out. I think it was late 2015 that we talked, and that's literally the first or second episode of my podcast. Because the first one was with you and Adam and Lauren.
Oh yeah.
And the second one was with John Wick and my friend Julien, with whom I participated in his podcast about role-playing game theory. So there's a lot of talk about that kind of stuff on his podcast, but that's in French. Okay. Anyway, John Wick talks about. We at one point in the conversation we talk about the hero's journey, but we talk about the fact that he mentions that there's only 7 stories, which he really profoundly doesn't believe in, because he's like, well, it's not true. I'm sure there's more. He believes in the idea that there's more ideas and creativity out there than people making money off the fact telling you that there's only 3, 7, 10 or whatever. So I do agree that there's probably structures that have worked really well so far, but the way to innovate and create new ones is not to stick to the same things. Now, from my first story, I'm not sticking to a structure because, as we talked about, I'm more of a gardener.
Gardener versus architect.
But anyway, the 3-act structure. So you got Act 1 is exposition, inciting incident. So you have something happens to someone, something, but presumably in most stories it's the protagonist. And so you have a rising, it goes up in terms of not necessarily, it could be emotional, but it could be just intensity somehow. Goes up. There's a bit of point down, and then the Act 2 is called the midpoint. Usually there's a dip in terms of there's something the protagonist or there's something that is encountered in the story that blocks it. So the typical thing is like X wants Y. And something happens, X wants Y and Z happens to prevent it. And so that's your midpoint. And then, so that's usually the lowest point in the story where it feels like the story can't happen somehow.
Every single Marvel film.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, typically, yeah. And then something happens, usually a montage, and then the action rises to get back to it, to the 3rd act, which is the denouement. So the action rises from the midpoint, something happens, so you have some other mostly, I mean, the stereotypical characters, the wise one, the buddy, somebody who's going to come along to remotivate the protagonist. It might not be a character. It might be some inner thing, which is, your inner voice, some external action. It might be a hand of God thing. That leads to rising action, and then the climax of the story, and then your
resolution. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's something cool.
So there's a few different ones, but overall, that's the 3-act. That's thing. The 3-act. I could put it on screen if we want. I have a few images of it. And I like the one I use this image that's like a roller coaster.
Yeah, put it on screen.
I'll show my screen.
Your favorite one. While you're doing that yesterday, so this is related, it's not a tangent. So Davina and I, we bought the buy your like infinite go and watch things in the cinema, and this thing came through that The Godfather was at the cinema. So yesterday we watched The Godfather on the big screen. Oh my God.
That's awesome.
So good. There was a couple of points where there were clearly some people in the room who hadn't seen it. And it was it's rated 15. So there were some younger people. I swear it was 18 when I was younger. But there are a couple of super duper emotional moments in that film. And I'm not going to spoil it. It's an amazing piece of cinema.
Yeah.
It really, really is. Where like the room went.
That's the experience we miss of the cinema. But we get it when we go. But when you have that experience, you realize we miss that by watching a lot of stuff on streaming and separately.
So true.
And that we miss that experience or rather miss out on that experience because of the past couple of years and social distancing and stuff closed and no gathering, etc. And that also I feel, for me, and maybe I think it's common, if not just most human beings, because to want and feel like we should, live experiences together.
So true.
And it's a funny one with the cinema because you don't even need to know anybody or relate to them or talk to them, but you're living something together. And those kinds of cases, like what you're describing, which I had on the opening day of Spider-Man a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
And you had there, the movie needs to be good enough, or people are really into it, because I would argue whether Spider-Man is really a good movie, but there's a lot of fan service. So
I would argue that too. I agree with you.
So and I get it less if I go, for example, I went to see The Card Counter, and it was, a small cinema. There were like a few people there. So while it was a really, really good movie, I didn't have that experience as much because there's just not a lot of people in the room.
It wasn't a big theater, and there weren't loads of people in there, but
you still felt it. You heard a couple of people.
Because it's not just that. Maybe it's because of our training or being present, or there was you could feel the emotions follow this diagram you got on screen. You could feel it. I could feel it in the room, and it's because I know the film really well and I love it so much. And there was a couple of moments where my wife and I were starting to think of our own family and particular people in our family as particular characters on screen, which is what I think the plot and storytelling is so wonderful, because it takes, not only is it escapism, I think it also puts humanity on writ large, whatever you're doing, whether you're reading a book or whatever. This is what I was going to ask you about plot though. So you've got this act 1, act 2, act 3. Do you think...
and I don't know how much we want to comment on that one or come back to the screen, because there's a lot more to be said. And this is far from being the only type of diagram to theorize stories.
No,
it's interesting to look at, and I don't know, we can just riff on it, the difference between a plot and a story. The plot is what maps out the story.
Because there is something hard. I think there's something hardwired about stories in us, right?
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what do you think is the difference between story and plot then? Plot is just the structure of it, where you plot the points. Is that what you mean?
Plot, yeah, I think so. The plot is the structure and the specifics of what happens in the story that makes it a story. I think the plot is part of what would be And I don't know if the analogy with the human body would be that the plot is the skeleton or the plot is the muscle. Do you see what I mean? Because the plot is the structure of what happens in the story. With no plot, there's no story. Arguably, maybe I'm wrong. I think with no plot of what happens, of things that happen in a story, you're just watching a landscape or people. But we automatically make up a story behind it, just like just like when I'm talking about at the mountain and watching the parents that are just like sledding with their kids, which is I was like, this is literal reality TV
on a big screen,
but it's HD. Not the same. So the plotting of the story is like what is happening at multiple points in the story that makes it a story, that makes it the story I want to tell, that can be related and relatable for others. Because if there's no story, if there's no plot, the people have to make up their own story, or they don't see it at all. They're like I'm just watching something.
And you're taking people on a journey. I certainly feel like that when I read a book, when I read a story. Could you put up the hero's journey?
Should I stop sharing this?
You could put up the hero's journey.
Should I? Okay.
I don't know, just for fun.
There's different kinds of diagrams for this.
Oh my god!
There's different acts. There's different types. Oh, here's the hero's journey.
There's a twist. I like the circular hero's journeys rather than the.
Well, that's the traditional one. This one. There you go. Well, actually, let's find a good one.
There are some good ones. There's one I've got on a slide that I use at school that's got this kind of octopus thing on it.
All right, let's get for the big one.
Wow,
okay, let's try this.
Oh, that does look quite good. Yeah, that's okay. That's cool too.
Possibly this one with little bits. It's the same. I think it's the same as the blue one. Oh, that's not big.
That's tiny. The mono, because you read Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey. You didn't like it.
I did. No, not really.
Here we go. That's good.
That seems good.
And whenever I see this and look through it, I just think of Star Wars. I can't help it.
Yeah, of course.
Or most recently, Dune.
Sure. That's the one I think he has in the book. Oh no, it's not. It's still. By the way, I think in the book, there's no diagram. The diagram comes later. He didn't make a diagram at all.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
At least not in the book. Not in the Hero with 1,000 Faces that I read. There's all the steps, but there's no diagram whatsoever. So I think I need to check, but I think the diagram was theorized and popularized later. That makes sense. Based on the ideas, unless he made it, but I don't think so. I could be wrong, so don't quote me on that one. This is our expert episode.
Talking about plots, did I tell you about going to see the latest Scream?
The latest Scream
film. Wes Craven?
Yes, a little bit, but I don't think we did it on video.
No, so this hero's journey. No
spoilers still, because no
spoilers. But I won't give any spoilers, but I think that when you talk about innovative story structures, and yes, I can see all the elements of the hero's journey in that film, but I thought it was the 90s sequel that everybody wanted, because I thought of the Matrix Resurrections. I was like, yeah.
It seems to be the thing going on right now. I also watched Ghostbusters Afterlife, and there's so many sequels / reboot homage.
Yeah, I think
Scream seems to be fitting in that same category.
It does. The phrase.
So it's like, all right, let's try to get money and find another slightly different way of doing a sequel, bringing people back to make sure that we're linking generations together, which I think ultimately Ghostbusters Afterlife does pretty well.
It does,
but it also adds nothing new.
Well, Scream does it well, and it adds stuff new. And the phrase that's used is a requel. So it's not a sequel, but it's not a prequel. It's a requel.
Oh
and I thought that was quite clever.
What a horrible name.
It's a horrible name, but I thought it was quite cool. And I don't know how it ultimately it feels to me like it's all different versions of this hero's journey. I really like the whole hero's journey thing. Anyway, ooh, that's a different screen.
So that was. Oh yeah, I forgot I'm sharing.
You are.
Should I stop sharing, or should we talk
Yeah.
about the hero's journey?
Let's talk about hero's journey. This is
Aside
it. What?
from comments, so I think we could keep looking at diagrams. My main point is to look at how do you build a story such that it will be enjoyable and interesting.
Mhm.
You think about what's going to happen in that story, and we rely on some tried and true structures. So the main point about plotting is that we're talking about, all right, let's go with the skeleton. We're talking about, it might be muscle mass might be the more appropriate, but I'm hesitating between both. I would need to look at that and find the best analogy. But the story relies on beats and stuff happening on some point. Now, there's different ways to do that, and there's different types of stories. But if nothing interesting happens, you don't really have a story. So the plot is like, what do you have that happens, and how do you plot it? And there's different ways of doing that. The 3-act narrative is one way to look at it that we just went over. The hero's journey is another way to look at it. So this was theorized by Joseph Campbell, who is a mythologist, and he wrote this book based on a lot of research and travels that he did all around the world just after the Second World War. I mean, the book was published just after the Second World War, I believe 1947, if I remember correctly. And the first version, there was another version. But based on a lot of previous work that he's done, based on the idea that he studied myths from all around the world, myths and religions from all around the world, and he found or theorizes that he finds the same stories happening over and over again. And based on that, created this structure called the hero's journey, or the monomyth. He calls it the monomyth, saying that every human society has the same structure of myth. Now, my big beef and grief with the whole book is that he doesn't explain his theory whatsoever. He just uses examples that he cherry picks from different myths and religions to justify his perspective of the way the things are. So it's just completely self-referential. There's no outside thinking or reference in the book that explains why he says this is the right theory. He just literally says, okay, the first step in the hero's journey is the hero is in a known world where he grew up, his village or whatever, and then he has a call to adventure. And then it's not much longer than this. It's like a couple of paragraphs that say more or less what I said. And people could challenge me who are specialists of his. And then he goes into, here's an example from the Sumerian myth and legend, and here's an example from what happens to somebody in the Egyptian thing. And then he moves on to the second point.
Okay,
that's it.
I see.
And I'm like, well, the references are and the stories he references are very interesting, but he doesn't justify anything. It's like, well, you could cherry pick whatever you want to justify your structure.
Yeah.
And then what's fascinating is this has become the main. Now, there must be something that is that makes sense to everybody, that this has been used everywhere. But it's used as a justification for how things are because of the diagram and in meetings and business rooms everywhere, and it's become its strength of its own. But if you go to the source of it, I'm like, this is really murky, and there's no weight to this at all, actually. There's enormous weights to the work he's done as a mythologist, but very little from what I could read anyway, unless it's somewhere else that I haven't read, as a thinker to say, well, this is why I think this is the right diagram.
Listening to you talk about this, it does. It makes sense to me. I'm reminded of the idea of archetypes and Jungian archetypes, and there are particular kinds of
and he refers to Jungian archetypes as well. So he uses the work from Jung. He uses the work from Jung, which I want to read and I haven't read. I know the archetypes and I've worked with them, but not in a really informed fashion. So he seems to rely on the work from Jung, but he doesn't seem to have done much thinking independently, aside from, storing and referencing and researching all the myths that he knows. Anyway,
Okay.
so there's this thing of the known and the unknown. So the hero gets called to adventure. Some kind of supernatural aid comes to his intervention. He either says yes or no to the supernatural aid. So there's a little loop that goes here about like saying yes or no and resisting the temptation and the adventure.
Kenobi, you must learn the ways of the Force, Luke. Yeah, that's
and at first he says no, goes back to his uncle, etc. So that's an optional part. This little loop that goes here, that's not here right now.
Yep.
Crossing the threshold. So beginning of the transformation of the hero, you leave the known world, you accept the call to adventure. And then you might have helpers and people on the way and a mentor that teaches you. There's challenges, temptations, stuff like that.
Harry Potter, blah, blah, blah.
Sure. Revelation. And so there's a whole thing about, he links it to Jung and Freud as well, because there's links, and he talks about the relationship with the father and the relationship with the mother.
Okay.
Yeah. And that there's a interpretation, is that the right word? The challenges that the hero faces have to do with going beyond his Oedipus, yes. Oedipus and the mother. Yeah. And so there's a lot of like the symbolism of the mother and the symbolism of the father, and the kind of stuff that the hero has to go through. So usually the challenges and temptations that he faces have to do with the relationship with the mother and the father, and the hero and the people that he crosses paths with represent or literally are the mother and the father. The father is the dominant, the eater. The mother is both the protector, creator, but also the one who might be smothering as well, depending on the situation in the story. Goes through that. There's a death and rebirth of the hero. The hero transforms. Then there might be a phase of atonement that's in front of the. I'm not sure what the atonement. Wait, what is that? I'm not sure about the atonement. I can't remember now, to be honest.
Atonement.
Oh, return the gift of the goddess. The gift of the goddess is the mother.
Right.
Atonement is the father.
Okay.
If I remember correctly, I have to. Okay. I would have to double check.
That sounds about right.
And then you go back home transformed. You're not the same. The trip has changed you. So for anybody who's traveled, you know that, and not just and lived a transformational type of experience, that you go back home and you're not the same as before.
Yeah.
That's altogether what the hero's journey is about. And the main idea is a lot of story plots, as you've been referencing, are built around this structure. And the plot of the story, so this is the journey of the protagonist, the hero. So it's just a different way of looking at it from the 3-act narrative. They're both they're not mutually exclusive. The 3-act narrative is looking at the story overall. You could plot the same events as going on here against the story plot. This is what happens to the hero. The other part is what happens to the story. It's just different ways of looking at the same thing. Arguably, again, this is just, you could probably subvert it. You could probably disrupt it, which a lot of storytellers have done. When I say storytellers, I mean film directors, writers, etc. So anyway,
have you got any? You can stop sharing. Have you got any examples of books that you've read where you thought the plot was really good and it surprised you or anything like that?
Oh yeah, totally.
Recent or maybe in the last year.
Sure. So I'm thinking of a few different things. One, I really enjoy probably what is traditional. I don't know if it's traditional. Anyway, the series I just finished reading of the Malazan Book of the Fallen, and I really like science fiction and fantasy. I really do. And it tends to be plot heavy. There's a lot of stuff happening in the story. Compared to what's going on. So actually, let me finish that thought. Steven Erikson and Ian Esselman, but Steven Erikson is the lead writer on that one, because there's two people writing, but he's got the main credits. I mean, the other guy's name is not on it. On these books, but the Malazan Book of the Fallen, it starts with, these are big. This is a series of 10 big books. And I've mentioned this on the show before. Starts with the novel called Gardens of the Moon, and I loved it. This is my favorite fantasy series that I've read. It's massive, it's epic, it's on a continental world building crazy scale.
Yeah.
But he writes a lot to disrupt what you would normally expect the story to go as. Like sorry, that was a convoluted sentence, but
I got what you meant though.
Yeah, I mean, he's known as an author for disrupting, circumventing, or changing what you expect, how your expectations as a reader, particularly if you're a reader who's read a lot of those stuff. And now we're all readers and viewers who are very experienced with plots, because most of us, we've seen Game of Thrones and Star Wars and etc. Not a lot of people have, like really a lot. So so he's really good at that. It's not that he doesn't follow the hero's journey necessarily, but that you don't necessarily see there's a lot of different protagonists, and it doesn't really go where you expect it to. And many times he does that.
Now that requires the skill of plotting that he's done there. That requires a deep understanding of the story you want to tell, but also a really great understanding of what to use that word, traditional kinds of story, and then changing it. That's like next level of thinking. Yeah, impressive.
It is. And then on the other end, so you have stuff like I've only read the first one that was adapted as a movie that I haven't watched. So this is by, I can't remember the author off the top of my head. It'll come back to me. I think it's Van something, a little bit like my name. Annihilation. Annihilation is a small book. It's the first of a trilogy called the Southern Border trilogy, I think.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I watched that film, Annihilation. I didn't read the books.
Yeah, I read the book. I didn't watch the movie, and I didn't read the others. But it's very famous for being extremely odd and not following, as far as I know, because I've only read the beginning of it, a traditional plot. You're following people who have no idea what's going on. You're really exploring something. So there's something interesting there, but that's still on this fantasy sci-fi side of things. And now I'm only at the beginning, like I'm a quarter of the book, but classic literature, and some classic literature, because I'm reading, as I mentioned, Light in August from Faulkner. And I'm finding it difficult to get into, because it's very well written on one hand, and which I agree with, but it's also, you're following characters. You're like, I don't understand what the relationship between these characters is. I'm really forcing myself to read through. I feel he's not giving me what I like of a thread to go, ooh, I want to know what's going to happen next.
This is so good, because I'm coming towards the end of The Glass Speed Game by Hermann Hesse. And he's, again, classic literature, or regarded as classic. I think it was written in the interwar period. I can't remember when. But and I had this, what you're describing is the same experience that I'm having when I read this book. It was taking me ages to get into. I couldn't understand what was so important about this. It was set in the future. Now I'm getting towards the end. I'm about like 90% of the way through, and it just seems to have grabbed me. The writing is really good. It's really immersive. There's a whole world that's created in it. But I couldn't understand the point of what I was reading, but it seems to have come together in some way. I wonder if it's because of the kinds of books that we've read, and maybe we haven't been exposed to that kind of way of thinking. I don't know. I also had the same experience that you're talking about when I read Frankenstein. It took me ages to get into, and then, oh my God, it was amazing. Whereas
there's other books that took me a while to get into, and I just really struggled the whole way through and forced myself to finish them. So, for example, that's one that I still don't understand, because he's widely quoted as one of the best writers ever, and a lot of people, famous people, love him. Is Kurt Vonnegut.
I haven't read any of it. I need to read some. I just want to see.
And I hear so many people, Tim Ferrisses of the world, but a lot of others refer to him as one of the best writers. And I read Dead-Eye Dick, and I read Slaughterhouse-Five, arguably his most famous books.
Yeah,
they're not big. It took me ages to get through. I just really did not enjoy them. I don't understand why he's considered to be amazing.
Interesting. It's very interesting. And was there a particular plot or story to those, or was it just you didn't grab you?
Sort of. Well, I don't want to. I mean, I can reveal it. You just watch. I don't know. It's just. I can't tell you why I was just not interested in what was going on.
That's very interesting.
I just didn't find it interesting. It was like, I don't care what happens to these characters. I don't really know why you're telling me this or writing this.
I read all the Game of Thrones that have been published, and then
me too.
I recently reread Dune. I felt, and I've read Lord of the Rings when I was younger and all of that kind of thing. I do think there's something special about Dune compared to those other epic books. Like Game of Thrones feels like a bit of, I don't know if it will stand the test of time as a book, like the way Lord of the Rings has and like the way Dune has. I don't know if it will.
Well, I'll tell you one of the reasons why.
Yeah.
To my opinion is it's not finished.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's true. That is true.
It's not complete. And the fact that it went to TV with so much success and it was completed on TV, makes it a probable reason why it wouldn't stand the test of time as a book either.
Yeah, it's true.
And the other thing, which I wanted to talk about at some point, which I'll just start mentioning now, is the world we live in terms of TV shows.
Yeah.
TV series are the main most popular way of storytelling, and reality shows, because I mean, for the first time we had TV in the apartment in the mountain. The girls turned on the TV at some point, and as soon as you turn on the TV, you have a reality show on TV, and I hadn't watched TV in so long, and I forgot, and just as soon as the TV is on, I feel like I'm losing neurons. I can hear the commentary, and I watch it, and I'm like, this is so bad, and this is what a lot of people are watching. And so both reality TV and TV shows are built in such a way that they do not finish.
Yes.
So they don't have, because they're not built like that. They're what they want to do is do an internally up and down slope of, like, when we look at this 3-story act, there's no denouement, because we want to keep you want to keep you hooked.
This is what irritated me.
Cliffhanger. And so you go, reality TV has a good guy and a bad guy. Even some reality TV has more ending than TV shows, because so something like The Bachelor, or I'm sure there's a bunch of others since then, because I don't know that many. I mean, I know a bunch, but The Bachelor has an ending of each season. Now there's going to be a new season of The Bachelor, but there's a beginning and an end to that season. Yeah, somebody wins, somebody loses at the end, and there's like all the ups and downs that are all scripted, by the way, of course. But in case you don't know, reality TV is scripted. Yeah. They call it semi-scripted.
Your scripted reality, don't they, or something like that?
Yeah, completely. But TV series, like, don't have the 3-act structure, or there's going to be multiple small ones within a bigger plot line. But from a production standpoint, you're trying to keep people tuned in all the time, playing one episode after the other. So one thing that's why I want to watch more movies is they just rarely has a satisfying end. It
is a soap opera. It is, and there are some
done for that.
There are some.
So either the production decides to stop because it's not working.
Yeah.
So they don't have an end at all, or they have to wrap things up in a couple of episodes, like, as best they can.
Yeah.
And or some few, but some have a more or less satisfying end, and I believe, like, Breaking Bad is in that category.
Yeah, I think The Wire is too.
I've heard of The Wire, and I still haven't seen it, but I think it's the same on that sound.
And I do, whatever. It's controversial, but I do think The Sopranos too. I do think that.
Yeah, I've not seen it, so I've only seen the first couple of seasons of that.
Oh, it's so good.
Which, funny enough, those are 3. I know, Showtime and HBO shows.
All 3.
Breaking Bad was Showtime, no?
No, Breaking Bad was AMC.
Oh yeah, AMC. Fine.
This is what frustrates me about The Walking Dead. So I watched season 1. There was only 6 episodes. It blew me away. I thought it was so good, and then it's descended into nonsense.
Oh, I stopped watching at season 3.
Yeah, 4. Me too. I was like,
I don't care anymore what happens to these people.
And interestingly, what you're talking about, things ending,
and you have to let go. I know that I want
to complete things.
I watch TV series longer than I probably should, quote unquote, like, because I get attached to the characters. But but very often I'm like, I'm into season whatever, and I'm like, this stopped really being interesting 2 seasons ago.
Yeah, yeah. The so to bring it back to plot, there's a couple of
Yes.
other graphic novels that I think really. The first time I read them, I was shocked at how the layers that were going on, and it did make me think when I read. And Watchmen is what I'm talking about. When I read Watchmen, I did wonder how the hell does somebody conceive of this?
Yeah,
How?
Alan Moore is amazing, and that's why I love like just fantastic authors like the Steven Erikson. Like that's how he conceived of this is just there's layers upon layers
yeah,
upon layers,
yeah, and Dune too. I
and
mean, Alan,
thousands of pages of books.
have you read From Hell?
Yeah,
The other
that's
Alan Moore.
amazing.
I just
So
like
beautiful. From Hell is just a masterpiece. It's gorgeous.
I can't get over how, and then of course it makes me think, how do you write that? How?
So actually, this is a perfect time to bring back my point from the beginning of the episode about plotting for tabletop role-playing games. In a traditional tabletop role-playing game, and there's newer forms that are slightly different or completely different as well, by the way, because we're still on the quite traditional type of storytelling and plot so far.
Yep.
And I don't know if we're going to go much past that because it's just time. But we'll circle back. If you are traditionally in a tabletop role-playing game, for anybody who doesn't know, one way to define it is it's collaborative storytelling together. And a traditional tabletop role-playing game, there is one person who is the narrator or director or traditionally called the dungeon master or the game master. So that's the role of one person. And then the others, like, traditionally 3 to 5 people. So you're ideally like, I like 4, so 3 or 4 is good. So you're 4 or 5 people around the table or virtual table if you're doing this by video, as has been increasingly popularized over the past 2 years. It existed before, but and the others are interpreting a character. So you create your own character and you're playing within a given universe. Star Wars, for example, which exists is very popular as, or the Lord of the Rings, or Game of Thrones, or Dungeons and Dragons, which is the mishmash of whatever. There's tons of different dedicated worlds, types of games with rules that are meant to emulate the type of genre or environment you're playing in. And as a game master, they're published. What the idea is, you're going through a story together.
Yeah.
So as the game master, you are talking and interpreting the world and representing the world that the other characters and players are evolving in. So I would describe a situation and then ask the players what they want to be doing. And I interpret, if I'm the game master, right? I interpret and describe the world around them. If they encounter other characters, what's called non-playing characters, like in video games, which that's where the term comes from, by the way.
I know. You know what? Just slight aside here.
Yeah, sure.
I just want to tell you that I was having a conversation with a bunch of 15, 16-year-olds, year 11s at my school.
Yeah.
And they were saying about, it's all just, everything is just socially constructed. And
socially constructed.
Yeah. It's all just a social construction. It's all made up. One of them turned to me, I joked and said, I'm just a figment of his imagination anyway. And then one of them turned to me and said, so you're an NPC? I was like, no, I'm Free Guy. I made some stupid joke. I don't know what I said, but listening to you talk about this, it's really, I really love your explanations, by the way. I think it's really cool. And it does make me wonder about reality and free will, but that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah. There's big topics there.
So
I'm just explaining a little bit more of the background in case anybody doesn't know.
Yes, collaborative storytelling is what you're talking about, role playing.
But nobody's watching, but it doesn't matter, just in case.
No, it's useful for me. I like this. It's helpful.
And so you have in a tabletop role playing game published, you have traditionally sections about how to play the game. What are the rules?
Yeah.
What's the environment?
Yeah.
And sometimes in most traditional ones, you have scenarios, stories, hooks that tell you, so that I don't have to write the story. I can tell, I've read it, and this is what I'm playing out with for my players. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. And then
So
each
it's like
player.
reading the skeleton of the story of the Lord of the Rings or a Star Wars episode, but it's not the same thing that what you've seen, because otherwise that would be kind of boring.
But it could go in any direction based on the characteristics of the
Well,
players,
that's
right?
depending how you play it.
Okay. All right, fine.
That's a whole other reason why there's interesting things to talk about in terms of role-playing game theory. Now, at a certain point, you would start writing your own scenarios or your own situations for the players to react to, and that's where you start looking at plot. It's like, what should I have happen to have my that my characters can react to become the heroes of their own stories? And then I have to think about how am I going to plot this? What is the plot? Or what is the scheme? And when you're playing, and so for plot was a word that's been used a lot. For example, when I was much younger, I played for a while semi live action role playing games. So live action role playing games called semi LARP or semi LARP, because it was based on the Vampire the Masquerade series. And it's called semi because it was just like over one night in a room. I mean, like a community center room type thing, right? People were dressed up, but it was a mix of different mishmash of being dressed up. And there is sort of stories going on, but mostly it's the players making up their own stories based on what the characters what they want to do. So it's very sandbox plotting.
That just sounds like
I made up, and I had my friends make up all sorts of plots just based on what their character wants. It's like, okay, I'm going to make up that my character wants to control the police in our city, and I'm going to find out how I can manage to do that. And I'm going to learn who controls the police in our city, and I'm going to start striking deals with them or fighting them or etc. So it's a sandbox with a lot of threads going on that are mostly playing character initiated. And then the people organizing, the storytellers, the organizers, are trying to react to what the players are doing, which is that's another philosophy of like running tabletop role-playing games.
So that's the other way around. So rather than the games master kind of sketching things out for the characters are driving it, and
ideally, for me, a good role-playing game around the table or live action, regardless, is a mix of both. That's why we usually have a session to talk about like what does everybody want. And when you start creating your character, you create wants and needs for your character that drives some of the story as well. And then when you create that, I can integrate that inside of the stories I'm going to run for the character.
Okay.
And there's traditional, which is very like they call it on rails.
Yeah.
So you have a story that's on rails, and whatever your character wants to do, things are going to happen in the story. Same thing.
Fine. Okay.
Which sense. Is very passive, or arguably very passive, but traditional. And then you have a lot of other ways of playing that are with much less prep. The thing on the very on rails is that it requires a lot of work off the gameplay of the game master.
Okay.
To prepare everything. But it also, if it's done well, it can be enjoyable, very enjoyable either. But it also is kind of stifling a little bit of the creativity and free will or player agency, which is another term that we talk about in role-playing game and in video games. You're stifling a bit of the player agency because you're forcing stuff on them that they may not want to have happen, or they might want to do something else, and you have to be ready to. Some game masters are not ready to improvise based on what their players want to do, and like force stuff on them, which I think is not cool. And then you have some other stuff that require a lot less preparation, but a lot more improvisational skills. And the game may be designed to help you bounce on those improvisational skills to have scenes and stuff that are a lot less scripted and a lot more improvisational and or sandboxy. So it depends. There's a lot of other but then we get into the theory of like, how do you design a game for something to be of a certain genre, or what kind of there's multiple types of role-playing games, etc.
So there's all that
to say that when you're thinking of a role-playing game, you're thinking of stuff going on in a plot, like what's going to happen in this story. And funny enough, there's a lot of role-playing games tabletop that have similar stuff to TV shows.
Yeah.
Because it's ongoing.
Yeah.
If you play with the same group. So
Yeah.
there are games that are much more modern that are played and designed to be short and one-off.
Yeah.
Like Fiasco that we started playing.
That just never
that we never
happened.
finished, but it doesn't matter. Whereas like traditional Dungeons and Dragons is kind of more done so that it keeps going on forever, unless you really make an effort to close a story arc. But I played a lot of games that started and we never finished. So we've become a lot, I mean, I say we, groups of people I've played with and do play with, better at trying to close arcs, partly because we talk a little bit more at the beginning, and also I think because we're older and we don't have time to go on forever, that we're like, okay, I'd like to commit to this game for X amount of sessions. So we're going to do our best to close up and have some kind of ending. Even if we open another arc, that we have some kind of ending after 5 to 10 sessions of gaming, for example.
Is that more, so you said a ton of stuff, which is really
I just went on one.
No, it's really interesting. There's a few things I want to pick out. One of the jump off points was that we're talking about TV series, and we're saying how one of the things that the reasons for Game of Thrones maybe not standing test of time is it isn't complete and not completing. How important
as a book, right?
As a book, how important is the story ending? Do you think?
To what? To the plot?
Well, number one, to the plot, but number two, to playing role-playing games. Because you said that thing about.
I think stories. I think the hook. And I don't really know, but the whole idea that we're hardwired for stories. Yes. But a plot, normally you have an end to the story. Otherwise, we're trying to keep you hooked on something,
which is
a merry-go-round that gets tiring or frustrating, and at some point you're just going to let go of it.
Which is
because if it doesn't have an end,
soap operas and reality TV is just a merry-go-round. There's no ending to it, which ultimately I think is unsatisfying. But the idea of a story, because I like the idea of a story resolving itself and completing itself. I do like that. Which, funnily enough, might lead us back to your short story. Which you just send it to me, because I want to see how it ends. I haven't read it yet, but I do want to see how it ends.
I want to mention something else, which is funny when noting, because originally we were talking about writing or creating for ourselves, and role-playing games does this as well. Is that for this short story, and I think I mentioned this before, I'm thinking of, okay, I started with a random idea. Then I was like, we talked about ends, which an end point is part of the plot. It's one part of the plot. Last time we talked about endings, right?
Yep.
So the plot points that I'm coming up with seem to me so boring, because I've read and watched so many things that I want to have something different. But trying to come up with something that doesn't exist yet is almost, if not completely, impossible.
That's impossible.
And what I always underestimate is whatever I'm thinking of is not what other people are thinking of. And also, we tend to enjoy the same types of stories over and over again, myself included. So the fact that I think, and I've done this in plots of role-playing games as well, because I'm like, oh, I'm going to have this happen, but I'm like, this is really bad. It's just overdone. And then the players really enjoy it. I'm like, oh, okay, that's just, I guess. So I'm always, I tend to think my ideas are no good because they've happened before and they come from somewhere. But the fact that they come from somewhere doesn't mean that they're necessarily bad, even if it's been done before.
Exactly.
But I have a hard time with that. I know that intellectually, but I'm still like, if I'm writing or preparing something, I'm like, oh my God, this has been done 10,000 times before, including our conversation right now.
So who cares? No one else is going to come up with it in the same way we do, which is why we want to read. What's your short story called, by the way? Does that have a title?
No. Why, did you write the title beforehand?
Well, that goes back to one thing we're talking about with endings. And the best writing I've done, well, actually, it's not the best writing I've done. Some of the writing that I've done that I think is really good is where I know there's an end point. And like, so the blog post I wrote yesterday, that had a title. It had a title.
But before you wrote it?
Yeah.
I rarely have a title before I write things.
Yeah, but then I'm writing about real life experience. It's not a creative story.
Yeah.
So I reckon if you, well, let's have some fun with this. Why don't you give me a random title and I'll write a short story for next week?
Right now?
Yeah, why not?
Okay.
What's the title you're going to give me?
I'm just looking around me.
Since when do you need to look around you to get inspiration? Just make up something.
Well, yeah, man. I just like I said, everything comes from somewhere, right?
Yeah, but
it comes from somewhere. So,
is that the title? It comes from somewhere.
Dark Splendor.
Dark Splendor, or it comes from somewhere.
Dark Splendor. That's the title.
Dark Splendor. Dark Splendor. Okay. Is Splendor like the brand name Splendor with an A at the end?
What? What's that? I don't even know.
Splendor is like it's a brand of, I think it's a brand of artificial sweetener in America.
Dark Splendor on the green. There you go. You get more words.
Dark Splendor on the green. Okay, my mind has gone off in 10 different directions already. Okay. So does that mean next episode we should talk about titles?
Titles? No. Sure.
Yeah, let's do that.
Could do. Oh, and at some point I want to talk about because we've been talking about this, and I think I mentioned it before. And you're one of the most stable types of conversations I have. And you've been mentioning wanting to play role-playing games, and I have one that is designed for one player, one game master, which is I've talked about it before. It's an investigator game.
What's it called?
This one's called Tulu Confidential, based on a game system called Gumshoe 1-to-1. It's a game in which you play hard-boiled private investigator in a film noir type settings with a slight background of supernatural.
Oh, that sounds brilliant. See me like Constantine.
And we could play, and I want to get back to it because I started playing, and I have one first episode on my podcast from last year from a year ago, almost, really embarrassing, that I should call Colleen that I had the first episode with. Don't watch it or listen because it would be spoiling.
But how long
it would take us? It would take us 2 or 3 episodes to go through the story, like 2-3 hours, 3 hours probably.
So why don't we just do that? Just play it live.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That's what I'm talking about.
That would be so awesome.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
I'd love to do that.
Should we do that next time? Or after we talk about endings? Okay.
We've talked about endings. No, have we talked about endings?
Titles, sorry. Titles you just said.
So next week we'll talk about titles.
It's going to be the week after, I think. Sorry, I have to go travel next week.
Whichever week it is, we'll talk about titles. I'm going to write a short story for our next episode called Dark Splendor on the Green.
And I'll commit to finishing my story for our next episode, which is probably in 2 weeks. Probably.
I thought you first said Dark Splendor on the cream, and then realized you said green.
You could choose.
It's green. It's green.
It's green. It's a bit weirder cream, but possible, I guess.
I know, but green. So shall I sum up this episode? Shall I bring it home?
Sure.
So this episode of, what did we call it? What are we calling ourselves, by the way?
It's the live stream says James and Willem's creative sessions.
James and Willem's creative sessions ... plot. So I'll actually, you know how I'm going to sum it up? I'm going to sum up what I've learned and what I'm thinking about. So through this discussion with you. So one of the key things that I've learned and realized is this idea of collaborative storytelling is what role-playing gaming is. I never thought of it that way. You might have said it before, but it's like I got it newly in the idea of plot. The other thing I got is a plot is a series of points in a story. And I could just write a journal, but it would be boring as hell because there's not necessarily any story unless I write it as a story, because I need to be invested in or interested in what's happening. There needs to be something happening to the characters at each plot point that makes me want to keep reading. The 2 other things I got from this episode are endings are important. The characters move through a story, through a series of plot points to an ending, so that's what makes it satisfying in the reading of the story. Even if the ending feels really weird or whatever, there's definitely a sense of an ending, which I think is really important for a story. And then the other thing that we talked about is the models. There are loads of models, but the 2 models we mentioned, the 3-act story and the hero's journey, and maybe even archetypes. So I do want to end with the idea that maybe we keep coming back to, which is architects and gardeners. A plot and story can reveal itself through the gardening of a story, which is hopefully what we're going to hear in your short story, Willem. But it can also be planned out, specified, plotted out, set out, like the full structure of the story, which is what I imagine What's His Face does for Game of Thrones. But there's no right way. And maybe we're all hardwired to listen to stories. Who knows?
Yeah. Great. Awesome.
Thank you.
See you next time. Thank
you. See
you
next time. I never see. How do I do this? Oh, there we go.